Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation. Today we're going to explore the fascinating world of history, focusing on thinkers, beliefs, and buildings. Our theme is cultural development, and we'll be covering how ideas, faith, and architecture have shaped societies over time. I'm excited to take you on this journey through the key aspects that have influenced cultures around the world. So let's get started. Now let's take a closer look at the growth of Puranic Hinduism. As we explore this slide, you'll notice that it highlights several key aspects of this vibrant religious tradition. First, we see references to chaityas, which are sacred prayer halls or shrines, often associated with Buddhist and Hindu practices. Then, there's Kutagarishala, a type of temple or structure that played a significant role in religious life. Moving on, the slide mentions popular traditions, emphasizing how these practices and beliefs became deeply rooted in the communities. We also see the phrase, grappling with the unfamiliar, which points to the period of religious and cultural exchanges, where new ideas and practices were introduced and integrated. Building temples is another crucial point. It marks the physical and spiritual infrastructure that supported religious devotion and community gatherings. We also see teachings of Buddhism and Jainism highlighted, reminding us of how these new religious philosophies influenced the cultural landscape. Sculpture, especially stories carved on stone, played a vital role in conveying religious narratives visually. A glimpse of Sanchi introduces us to one of the most famous Buddhist sites, with its impressive stupas that serve as monuments of enlightenment. Finally, the slide touches on the Buddha and the quest for enlightenment within Buddhism, along with the message of Mahavira from Jainism, which underscores the spiritual pursuits beyond worldly pleasures. All these elements together reflect a dynamic period of religious development between 600 BCE and 600 CE, shaping the diverse spiritual landscape we see today. On this slide, we see that two important sacrifices were performed, namely the Rajasuya, which is a consecration ceremony, and the Ashvamedha, a horse sacrifice. These were significant rituals in ancient times, symbolizing power and royal authority. The sacrifices included hymns that praised deities such as Agni, the fire god, Indra, the king of gods, and Soma, associated with the sacred plant and drink. These hymns were chanted during prayers, especially when people sought good health, cattle, sons, and a long life. The Rigveda, one of the oldest texts, contains many such hymns and presents various beliefs about the universe, life, and spirituality. So overall, these sacrificial traditions were not just religious acts, but also reflected social values and beliefs. They were central to the spiritual and cultural life of the people, connecting human aspirations with divine powers. As we move into this chapter, we see the emergence of new schools of thought and thinkers, specifically Buddhism and Jainism. These spiritual traditions marked a significant shift in the cultural landscape of the time. They are primarily known through various sources like monuments, inscriptions, stupas, and texts, which give us valuable insights into their development. What's fascinating is how these ideas were expressed, both orally and in written form, and reflected not only in literary texts, but also in architecture and sculptures. These artistic expressions helped communicate their philosophies to a wider audience. The main focus here is to understand the profound cultural changes and developments occurring during this period. These new beliefs didn't just influence spiritual life, but also brought about broader social and cultural transformations, shaping the course of history in ways that are still evident today. This chapter helps us see how these ideas emerged, spread, and left their mark on our heritage. So, the decisions made by both the Begums of Bhopal proved to be quite fruitful, which is why the Sanchi Stupa has been preserved till today. Funding was provided specifically for the publication of volumes related to the site, ensuring that its history and significance were documented thoroughly. They also requested to take plaster copies of the sculptures and structures, which helped in protecting the originals and sharing the art with a wider audience. Sultan Jehan played a crucial role by funding the museum and the guest house, where John Marshall was allowed to write detailed volumes dedicated to both Begums. This was important for scholarly work and for raising awareness about Sanchi's cultural importance. Interestingly, the Europeans wanted to take away parts of the Sanchi stupa, especially the eastern gateway. However, Shah Jahan Begum gave permission for the removal of plaster copies instead, which was a strategic move to protect the actual structure. Both Shah Jahan Begum and Sultan Jehan Begum contributed financially to these preservation efforts. Their collective support was instrumental in safeguarding Sanchi. Overall, the role of the Begums was pivotal. They actively worked to preserve Sanchi and ensure its survival. Their efforts are why the Sanchi stupa still stands today, as a testament to our rich cultural heritage. Now, let's talk about Kutagarishala. These were the places where debates and discussions took place, serving as forums for philosophical exchanges. Interestingly, these gatherings often went against the traditional Brahmanical norms of the time, challenging established authority and ideas. This was a significant shift because it fostered an environment where questioning and critical thinking could thrive. One of the key topics discussed in these debates was the importance of sacrifices, which were central to the religious practices of that era. However, thinkers like Buddha and Mahavira questioned the authority of the Vedas, which were seen as the ultimate scriptures. They proposed a different approach, that individuals could attain liberation or salvation through their own efforts, rather than relying solely on rituals or sacrifices. This led to engaging discussions about life after death and what happens to the soul, prompting new questions about the nature of existence and ultimate reality. As these ideas spread, teachers traveled from place to place, trying to convince others and society at large about their views. Over time, this vibrant exchange of ideas gave rise to as many as 64 different schools of thought, each with its own perspectives and beliefs. So these debates and discussions in Kutagarishala were not just intellectual exercises, they were fundamental to shaping new philosophical and spiritual directions. They challenged existing norms, questioned authority, and ultimately contributed to a richer, more diverse spiritual landscape. The Buddha and other teachers of his time primarily taught orally, engaging in discussions and debates with their followers. Men, women, and possibly even children attended these discourses to listen and reflect on what was shared. Interestingly, none of the Buddha's speeches were written down during his lifetime, which highlights the oral tradition that was so central to early Buddhism. After the Buddha's death, which is generally placed around the 5th or 4th century BCE, his disciples came together at a council held in Vaishali, known today as Vaishali in Bihar, to compile his teachings. These collections are called the Tipitaka, meaning 3 baskets, because they stored different types of texts. These texts were initially transmitted orally, passed from generation to generation through memorization and recitation, and only later written down. The Tipitaka is divided into 3 main parts: the Vinaya Pitaka, which contains rules for monastic discipline, the Sutta Pitaka, which includes the Buddha's teachings and sermons, and the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which deals with philosophical and psychological analysis. Each of these sections consists of multiple texts, forming a comprehensive body of Buddhist literature. Over time, Buddhist scholars wrote commentaries on these texts, providing explanations and interpretations. As Buddhism spread into new regions like Sri Lanka, additional texts such as the Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa emerged, offering regional histories and biographies of the Buddha. Many of these works are in Pali, the language of early texts, while later compositions shifted to Sanskrit. When Buddhism reached East Asia, pilgrims like Fa Xian and Xu Zhang journeyed from China to India to seek out these texts firsthand. They brought them back to their own countries, where scholars translated them into local languages. Indian teachers also traveled far and wide, disseminating texts and teachings across Asia. For centuries, these texts were preserved in manuscripts stored in monasteries across different regions. Today, we have modern translations from Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and Tibetan, making these teachings accessible to people worldwide. This process of preparation and preservation shows how deeply committed Buddhists have been to maintaining the integrity of the Buddha's teachings throughout history. Their manuscripts were carefully preserved in libraries, ensuring that the knowledge of Jain teachings was passed down through generations. During the Kushana period, Mathura emerged as a vibrant center of Jain art, showcasing beautiful sculptures and carvings that reflect the religion's rich cultural heritage. Most of the Jain literature was published in Pali, Sanskrit, and Tamil, which helped spread their teachings across different regions. Jains also built impressive stupas with railings and pillars, which served as important religious monuments and places of worship. This construction not only represented their devotion, but also helped in spreading Jainism to new areas. At the core of Jain beliefs are the three gems: right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct. These are the guiding principles for living a righteous life and achieving spiritual liberation. The religion was founded by Rishabha, considered an incarnation of Narayana, and there were 23 Tirthankaras or teachers who played vital roles in its development. Vardhamana Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara, was born in 540 BCE in a small village called Kundagrama near Vaishali. He chose to leave worldly pleasures at the age of 30 and dedicated himself to spiritual pursuits, attaining enlightenment at 42. Mahavira's teachings emphasize the importance of overcoming worldly attachments and living a life of purity. His message, and that of Jainism, is ultimately about going beyond worldly pleasures and focusing on the soul's liberation. It's a path that encourages self-discipline, nonviolence, and truthfulness, guiding followers toward a life of higher purpose and ultimate freedom. The spread of Buddhism is a fascinating story of how Buddha's thoughts traveled far beyond his lifetime. During his life and after his death, his teachings reached regions like Central Asia, Japan, Korea, China, and even across the seas to Myanmar, Thailand, and other parts of Southeast Asia. This expansion was driven by the efforts to reconstruct his teachings through editing and translating Buddhist texts and hagiographies, which are biographies of saints and religious leaders. Now let's talk about the founder himself, Gautama Buddha, also known as Siddhartha. He was born in 563 BCE into the Kshatriya caste, in a place called Lumbini near Kapilavastu, located at the foothills of Nepal. His early life was quite sheltered, but at the age of 29, he abandoned that life and began a journey of seeking enlightenment. He wandered for about 7 years, driven by a deep curiosity and desire for understanding. He was deeply affected by seeing the realities of life. He encountered a dead body, a sick person, and an old man, experiences that made him realize the inevitability of suffering in life. At the age of 35, under a pipal tree in Bodh Gaya, he received profound knowledge and insight, which marked a turning point in his spiritual journey. From that moment on, he was known as Buddha, meaning the enlightened one, because he had achieved a deep understanding of life and the path to liberation. So, in essence, Buddha's quest for enlightenment was not just about personal awakening, but also about sharing a path that could help others find peace and understanding. His teachings continue to inspire millions around the world today. Monastic existence is considered necessary for salvation, especially in traditions like Jainism and Buddhism. It's believed that dedicating oneself fully to spiritual practices helps achieve liberation. Penance and asceticism are important tools in this journey, as they can help free a person from the constraints of the cosmic order and past karma. Speaking of karma, it's the cycle of birth and rebirth that shapes our lives. Our actions create effects that influence future lives. Another key point is the principle of non-injury, or ahimsa. In these traditions, non-injury isn't just about avoiding violence, it extends to all living beings. The entire world is seen as animated, meaning that even non-living things are considered to have life or a form of consciousness. This deep respect for all forms of life is central to Buddhist and Jain teachings, guiding ethical behavior and spiritual practices. So, in essence, these teachings emphasize that through disciplined monastic life, ethical conduct, and understanding karma, one can move closer to liberation. And recognizing the life in everything fosters compassion and nonviolence, which are vital to this spiritual path. Now let's look at the two main sects within Jainism, the Svetambars and the Digambars. These groups are divided based on certain practices and beliefs, but both share core principles. One of the most important aspects of Jainism is its emphasis on nonviolence and ethical living. This is reflected in their 5 vows, which are fundamental to their spiritual path. These vows include nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, celibacy, and non-possessiveness. You can see how these principles guide their daily lives and help them pursue spiritual purity. Overall, Jainism's teachings focus on compassion, self-discipline, and respect for all living beings, which ties into the larger theme of living harmoniously with others. Let's explore how Buddhism is divided into 2 main sects, Hinayana and Mahayana. Both focus on different approaches to spiritual practice, but they share core teachings from the Buddha. Central to these teachings is the Eightfold Path, which guides followers toward enlightenment and liberation from suffering. Interestingly, Buddhism doesn't recognize the existence of a creator god or a permanent soul. Instead, it teaches that what we consider our self is actually just a collection of changing phenomena. This concept is called anatta, or not-self, emphasizing that the world is essentially soulless. Buddhism also emphasizes the importance of both penance and self-indulgence, meaning that discipline and self-awareness are necessary to free oneself from worldly troubles and attachments. Life, as taught, is inherently marked by sorrow or dukkha, which is an unavoidable part of existence. Another key point is that the world is transient, nothing lasts forever. Everything is constantly changing, and recognizing this impermanence helps us develop a more balanced perspective on life. All of these teachings are rooted in the Sutta Pitaka, which contains the Buddha's discourses and core doctrines. In summary, understanding these observations helps us see how Buddhism offers a practical approach to understanding life's suffering, emphasizing inner development and insight into the nature of reality. Followers of Buddha, today I want to talk about the life of the monks and the early community. Monks lived a simple life, often with very minimal possessions, focusing on spiritual practice and discipline. The Buddha's followers came from many different social backgrounds, which is quite significant because it shows how his teachings reached all kinds of people. Once someone joined the Sangha, or the monastic community, they were regarded as equals. They shed their previous social identities, whether they were from a royal family, a merchant class, or a laborer, and took on a new identity as bhikkhus or bhikkhunis. This sense of equality was a core part of the community. Initially, only men became monks, but over time, women also entered the monastic life. In fact, Buddha's own mother, Mahapajapati Gautami, became the first nun, paving the way for women to join the Sangha as well. The community of these followers was organized into what we call the Sangha, which is an essential part of the Buddhist tradition. These monks and nuns not only practiced the teachings, but also became teachers of Dhamma, sharing the doctrine with others. So, those who followed Buddha, whether monks or nuns, played a vital role in preserving and spreading his teachings. Their simple, egalitarian lifestyle and dedication helped shape the foundation of Buddhism as we know it today. Let's take a moment to reflect on some of the most sacred sites associated with Buddha's life. Kusinagara is the place where he attained Nibbana, the ultimate liberation. Sarnath is where he delivered his first sermon, sharing his profound insights with others. Bodh Gaya is the site where he attained enlightenment, a pivotal moment in his spiritual journey. And Lumbini is celebrated as his birthplace, the beginning of his path. Beyond these key locations, many sites were considered sacred not just because of their significance, but also because of their natural beauty, trees, rocks, and other natural elements. These sites, which also included shrines, are known as chaityas. They played an important role in Buddhist tradition, serving as places of worship and reflection. Several chaityas are mentioned in Buddhist texts, and they are closely associated with Buddha's life and teachings. These sacred sites and chaityas help us connect with the physical and spiritual landscape of Buddhism, reminding us of the profound moments in Buddha's life journey and the reverence these places continue to inspire today. Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis also contributed towards building these monuments. Their efforts and devotion played a significant role in creating the sacred sites we see today. Hundreds of donations were made by both women and men, showing how widespread and inclusive support was for these religious structures. Interestingly, Some donations came from powerful rulers like the Satavahanas, highlighting the importance of these monuments across different levels of society. We also have records that detail the donations made for building and decorating the stupas, giving us insight into the collective effort involved. Ashoka, the great emperor, was instrumental in this process. He distributed relics and ordered the construction of stupas at important places like Sanchi and Sarnath. Now you might wonder, how were these stupas built? Well, stupas contain relics, which makes them very special. They are symbols of both the Buddha and Buddhism itself. The relics, which include bodily remains and objects used by Buddha, were buried in these mounds, and that's how the stupas came to be. So, to answer why stupas were built, these structures serve as important religious symbols because they house relics of the Buddha. They are physical representations of his teachings and his life, helping followers to remember and revere him. Overall, stupas are a testament to the devotion and efforts of many people across different eras, all working towards preserving the Buddha's legacy. Sculptures were truly the most valuable and beautiful sources of history during this time. They served as a kind of visual storytelling, capturing stories and important events in a permanent form. These stone sculptures signified more than just artistic expression. They symbolized cultural beliefs, historical narratives, and societal values. By studying them, we can gain a deeper understanding of the stories that these ancient civilizations wanted to preserve and pass down. They remind us how art and history are intertwined, with sculptures acting as timeless storytellers carved in stone. Now here we see a rural scene, which at first glance might look simple or everyday. But if we look deeper, historians interpret this image as more than just a peaceful village. It actually tells the story of a very significant legend, the Vesantara Jataka. This story is about a prince who, out of great compassion and generosity, gave away everything he had to a Brahmana, a learned priest. He then decided to leave his royal life, along with his wife and children, and go into the forest to live a life of renunciation. This act of giving and renouncing worldly attachments is a central theme here. It highlights the values of selflessness, sacrifice, and spiritual pursuit, which are key ideas in many teachings of Buddhism. So, when we look at this scene, we're not just seeing a tranquil rural life. We're also witnessing a visual representation of profound moral and spiritual lessons. It connects to our overall theme by reminding us of the importance of compassion and detachment in the path to enlightenment. The stupa was meant to represent the Mahaparinibbana, which is the final passing away of the Buddha. It serves as a reminder of his ultimate liberation and peace. The empty seat, on the other hand, was designed to symbolize the meditation of the Buddha, reflecting his deep state of contemplation and enlightenment. It's a powerful visual cue for devotion and mindfulness. Additionally, the most frequently used symbol in Buddhist worship is the wheel. This wheel stands for the first sermon of the Buddha, which he delivered at Sarnath. It represents the teaching of the Dharma and the spreading of the Buddha's wisdom. Together, these symbols of worship, the stupa, the empty seat, and the wheel, help us connect with the core teachings of Buddhism and deepen our understanding of its spiritual practices. They remind us of the Buddha's journey, his enlightenment, and the ongoing cycle of teaching and learning. Now, let's take a closer look at Gajalakshmi, also known as Maya. This motif features a woman surrounded by lotuses and elephants, which appear to be sprinkling water on her, as if performing a sacred abhisheka or consecration. Some historians interpret this figure as Maya, the mother of the Buddha, emphasizing her connection to his origins. Others see her as Gajalakshmi, the goddess of good fortune, who is often associated with elephants. Moving on to the animals depicted in these sculptures, you'll notice a rich variety: elephants, horses, monkeys, and cattle. For instance, elephants are frequently shown to symbolize strength and wisdom, qualities highly valued in the culture and spiritual tradition. Lastly, let's talk about the Shalabhanjika, or the beautiful women swinging from the edges of gateways. According to popular belief, these women symbolize a touch that causes trees to blossom and bear fruit. This makes them an auspicious symbol, and you'll often find them integrated into the decorative elements of stupas. All these motifs, goddesses, animals, and mythical figures, serve to enrich the spiritual and cultural narrative embedded in the architecture and art of this period. Shiva was commonly symbolized by the linga, which is a simple yet powerful representation of his divine energy. However, he was also occasionally depicted in human form, which helped devotees relate to him more personally. Moving on to the traditions within Hinduism, Shaivism is a major tradition where Shiva is regarded as the chief god. In this tradition, there was a growing emphasis on worshipping a specific deity, often through various rituals and temples. On the other hand, Vaishnavism is another important branch, where Vishnu is worshipped as the principal deity. Within Vaishnavism, we see the development of cults centered around Vishnu's various avatars or incarnations. There are 10 recognized avatars in this tradition, each believed to be a form Vishnu took to save the world. These avatars appeared whenever the world was threatened by chaos, disorder, or evil forces, essentially acting as divine saviors. This evolution reflects a key aspect of Puranic Hinduism, which grew significantly during this period. The Puranas helped shape popular religious practices and stories about these deities, making them more accessible and engaging for the common people. Overall, this period marks a significant growth in the complexity and richness of Hindu religious life, emphasizing personal devotion and mythic narratives that continue to influence Hinduism today. The early temple was quite simple, a small square room known as the Garbhagriha. This was the innermost sanctum where the main deity's image was kept. It had just a single doorway, making it accessible for worshippers to enter. From here, they could offer their prayers and offerings directly to the deity. This basic design laid the foundation for more elaborate temple structures that would develop over time. But it's important to remember that even these simple spaces were deeply sacred and central to religious life. This shows how the core purpose of the temple, worship and connection with the divine, remained constant, even as the architecture evolved. When text and image do not match, it highlights how sometimes visual representations can be confusing or misinterpreted. A prime example of this is a famous sculpture along a massive rock surface in Mahabalipuram, Tamil Nadu. Some believe it depicts the descent of the river Ganga from heaven, a significant mythological event. Others interpret it as a story from the Mahabharata, specifically Arjuna doing penance on the riverbank to acquire weapons. This illustrates how different viewers can see different stories or meanings in the same artwork. When European scholars first encountered these sculptures in the 19th century, they often couldn't understand what they were looking at. The gods and goddesses depicted in these images sometimes had multiple arms and heads or combined human and animal features, which seemed strange or even horrifying to them. In trying to make sense of these unfamiliar images, these early scholars often compared them to Greek sculptures, which they knew better. But this approach sometimes led to misunderstandings, because they were trying to fit unfamiliar Indian art into a familiar Western framework. This example underscores how important it is to approach unfamiliar cultures and their art with an open mind and a willingness to understand their unique symbols and stories. It also reminds us that sometimes what we see at first glance might not tell the whole story.